museums to view the odd, the eerie, and the unexplained.
We are a recreation of a 19th century American dime museum. And dime museums, when they sprang up in this country, were full of anything the American public would pay 10 cents to see.
People have always been interested in the weird, the strange, the bizarre, the exotic, and the unusual.
For just 10 cents, they came to see the worst that nature had on offer. Some creatures were patently fake, products of an entrepreneur's imagination. But others brought us face to face with real mutations.
It is freaky, but it is. Look at it.
Across the Atlantic in Great Britain was a celebrated sideshow freak, Joseph Merrick, the famed Elephant Man. A tragic mutation within his genes gave rise to a disease called Proteus syndrome. Large bony growths covered the right side of his entire body. A mutation is a change in our genes. Deep within every cell, our chromosomes hold the instructions for life. These are our genes, and they're held on long, delicate strands of DNA. They read like a recipe book. But sometimes there's an unexpected change in part of the recipe. The result is an altered or damaged gene that we call a mutation. For Joseph Merrick, the mutation was so severe he could never lead a normal life. He spent his adult years as a sideshow freak until he was rescued and offered shelter at the Royal London Hospital. His short life ended at the age of 28. Today, such human tragedies are no longer a source of entertainment. But many of us are still fascinated by creatures that are one in a million. In West Fork, Arkansas, Fred Lally has spent 50 years collecting some most unusual reptiles. This is Zip and his better half, Pip. With this member of Fred's menagerie, it's not clear if the left head knows what the right is doing.
They're both equally perfect heads, perfectly aware of everything, but one of them is more of a mild disposition and the other one's a little grouch. And every now and then it doesn't like me fooling with it, it nips me.
Fred has been fascinated by reptilian oddities all his life, and he now makes a living taking his mutant pets on tour to summer county fairs.
And it's not the most lucrative business, but I do make a living at it, and I'm a free person.
But of all the animal anomalies he's encountered in his long career, one stands head and shoulders above the rest. Meet Golden Girls. She's no ordinary snake and came with no ordinary price tag. Fred paid $20,000 for one of the rarest reptiles in the world. But this isn't a case where two heads are really better than one.
Sometimes when she crawls, you'll see one head's wanting to go one way and one's another. That's very natural. It shows that both heads, and I would say they're near equal, but it seems like the head on the right usually gets its way. The main thing I watch for is that they don't breach an object. Their heads are formed into the body somewhat like a Y. And it's easy for them to become impaled, I guess you could say, on a twig, a small shrub or something, and they can injure themselves.
Golden Girls wouldn't survive in the wild. She depends on Fred's care and attention. But what causes a two-headed mutation? At the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Margaret Castle studies genetic diseases in young animals.
What I can show you here is a one-headed, two-bodied, conjoined pig twin. You can see it has one head here, clearly, and it has all arms, two on this side, two on the back side, and it has all of its legs, its hind legs, you can see down here. So it's actually a pig that has a complete separate spine from each other, so it's twins, but just one head. Typical conjoined twins.
In nature, conjoined twins are rare, but they nearly always make the slot at the end of the evening news bulletins.
This is Rudy, the two-headed pig. He's got 2 noses, 2 mouths, 3 eyes, and a personality.
Normally what you have is one egg gets fertilized by one single sperm. The cells then start to divide. Sometimes you will get a split in those cells and 2 separate individuals will form twins. But sometimes that split doesn't quite make it. Depending on where they're joined is 2 heads or 2 bodies, 4 limbs, 5 limbs. You get a variety of different malformations caused by this not quite complete split.
In humans, if the embryo hasn't divided by the 3rd week of pregnancy, then Siamese or conjoined twins may result. They're among the rarest of human beings. Only a few hundred pairs are born each year. More than half are stillborn and may live for only a few days. But are conjoined twins actually caused by mutation?
We think it's a combination of both genetics and environment, but nobody actually knows. We geneticists tend to be a little more careful and say we call it a malformation at this point because we haven't been able to locate any genes to this day that actually cause conjoined twins.
But whether conjoined twins are mutations or not, they are only the tip of the mutation iceberg. Mutations are happening every day to all of us, but most of the time, they're invisible.
For me, a mutation is something that occurs all the time. It's a natural process. Many times, a mutation has no consequence. There's a change in the DNA, but that DNA is not important for the development of the embryo or the physiology of the organs.
When the cells in our body divide, they must replicate their DNA. Sometimes that's when a copying error can take place, but usually it's fixed up by our body's own correction system.
So we have proofreading enzymes, if you will, that actually zip along the DNA and they go and find a mistake and they get rid of it. They're quite efficient. They work in general. I mean, we'd be long dead if we didn't have these.
Proofreading enzymes fix up small mutations on a daily basis. But when they fail to do their job, that's when a mutation occurs.
A mutation can occur in any cell in the body, but if it occurs in a cell that gives rise to an egg or a sperm, and those egg or sperm are used to make a child, then that mutation is inherited and passed on to generations.
Those mutations could be detrimental and could cause things like birth defects, or they could be beneficial and cause, for instance, stronger bones or whiter teeth, or a change in your hair or eye color, or sometimes the mutations just make me different from you.
The townsfolk of Olney, Illinois know only too well about color mutations. Their parks are filled with some of the cutest mutants on the planet, and every evening they come out to play. A population of albino squirrels has settled here and made the town their home. According to local folklore, the first pair of white squirrels appeared in 1902, when William Stroop found them in woods outside the city. Stroop captured the pair and displayed them in the local saloon. Later, they were released into City Park, where they started to breed. In their heyday in the 1940s, the population of albino squirrels reached almost 800. The townsfolk of Olney have given the squirrels pride of place, and they've helped shape the very identity of the town. Olney is not alone in treasuring its albinos. Whenever one of these rare white creatures is discovered, Its strangeness captivates us.
Thought to be about 40 years old, the crocodile's creamy skin and pale whitish eyes are radically different from the colouring of normal crocs, and according to researchers, the syndrome is extremely rare. But at least they've named the rare creature. From today, he'll be simply Snowy.
And two-headedness isn't Golden Girl's only claim to fame. Normal rat snakes are black with a black tongue and eyes. Golden Girl's is also an albino, a case of being doubly blessed or doubly cursed. But whether it's an albino snake or an albino squirrel, the cause of their albinism is the same. Within every cell in the body, our genes hold the DNA instructions for how that body grows and functions. Amongst the thousands of genes in every cell, there are those that determine eye and hair color. In grey squirrels, these genes code for a pigment called melanin, which gives them grey fur and black eyes. But a mutation in these genes means little or no melanin is produced, so there's no color at all in the fur or the eyes. The result is an albino animal. Genes come in pairs, and every baby squirrel receives one from mum and one from dad. It's only when both parents pass on a mutated gene that the baby is an albino. The citizens of Olney pamper their squirrels, but dogs, cats and other predators find the albinos easy pickings. Their eyesight is poor, and without any color for camouflage, they stand out. So these special creatures are at risk. To help more albinos survive, Olney has risen to the challenge. Police officers here are perhaps the only ones in the world charged with protecting albino animals. White squirrels have the right of way on city streets, and it's an offence to harm them in any way. The latest squirrel census shows that the population is now stable. It's the same the world over. Albino animals carry a slight disadvantage in the struggle for survival. This small mutation makes life just a little bit harder. But sometimes a small mutation may be an advantage, giving some animals the edge over their competitors.
Mutations have allowed the whole animal, plant, human world to actually survive and make it in this world. Without mutations, we would probably die out when we encounter the first virus, for example. We wouldn't be able to survive.
700 years ago, a genetic mutation enabled a small group of human beings to survive a deadly disease. In the middle of the 14th century, the plague swept rapidly through Europe, killing 25 million people. That's a third of the population in just 4 years. But a small group of people managed to survive the deadly virus.
There was a small subset of people, less than 1%, who did not get plague, and they would survive no matter how bad the plague outbreaks were. About 300 years later, the number of these people had actually increased to about 10%. These people actually had a mutation that made them resistant to the plague bacteria. And later, so many years later, of course, these people increased because they were oftentimes the only survivors of the plague outbreaks.
The last great outbreak of plague occurred in the 17th century. In 1665, the Black Death struck London, taking 75,000 victims in its wake. In September of that year, George Vickers, a tailor in the small village of Eyam, received a parcel of cloth from London. It was ridden with plague-infected fleas. 4 days later, Vickers was dead. After many villagers succumbed at an alarming rate, the rector of the village made the momentous decision to quarantine